everyone. Hi, my fellow empaths. My name is Alana, rhymes with Nirvana. Maybe you know that already. Glad to have you here today for our weekly Facebook Live. Today's topic, we will be talking about 5 essential keys to healing from childhood trauma. And this is a topic that came up from our last call, which was about trauma response or empath awareness. So if you haven't watched that call yet, you can find it in the media section of this page and you can get that information as well. So this is sort of going more in depth to into the childhood trauma piece of this journey. And hi, Michelle, glad that you could make it here. So if you have struggled with healing from your childhood trauma, if you're just curious about it, you're in the right place. You can also join us on Zoom today if you would like. I'm going to be doing both places. I'm on Facebook Live and on Zoom, two different devices. So if you want to come in that way as well, you might have a chance to interact a little bit more with me. So let's dive in. One of the things that I have been exploring over the last couple of decades is, why is it that when people go through intense trauma, some people come out the other side seemingly unscathed, go on to lead normal, happy lives, even though they've had really intense trauma, and then other people, maybe who don't even have as intense trauma, end up struggling and not able to cope. So that's sort of a question that I've been exploring for a long time and looking at what is this essential pieces of healing from childhood trauma and getting on to having a happy, productive life. So we'll be exploring some of more of that today. And if you stay till the end, I do have a special invitation for you, so you'll want to stick around for that. And I'm going to be checking in with your comments as well. So the Zoom link says invalid. Are you going to the event page? We have somebody here that just popped on Zoom. Let me just see if I can help you with that. It's the Zoom link that I pretty much use for everything. So if you can find another Zoom link somewhere on my page, it will be the right one. Don't know if that's helpful for you, but I will just see if I can put it multitask here for a second and put up the Zoom link as well as we go about this. So a little bit about me if you haven't met me before. Again, my name is Alana, rhymes with Nirvana. I'm an empath, happiness and empowerment coach, and I've been doing this work for maybe 10 years, doing healing work for 10 years. I've really focused in the last 5 years or so on supporting empathic and sensitive people who are really struggling with some level of emotional turmoil or overwhelm, to put an end to that, to reclaim their confidence, master their empathic abilities, so that you can have true happiness and true peace and create a life that truly and honestly works for you. And hang on, I'm just going to pop the Zoom link over on our Facebook page if people are wanting to join us for Zoom. And my background, so I struggled for more than 20 years with depression that I didn't know how to overcome. But I was determined. I knew there had to be a different way, that I wasn't going to live my life this way forever. And so through my own personal development, exploration, study, research, I came to recognize some things that made a real and lasting difference for me, including that I was empathic, and then also I had unrecognized and unresolved trauma from my childhood that I finally got to see what it was and then figure out how to really resolve it for myself. Okay, I'm putting up the Zoom link in the group if you want to join us on Zoom. And so through that journey, and let me just pop off of here so you're not hearing whoever's messaging me. So through that journey, I've come to some unique insights that I've used in my own transformation and also the transformation of the work that I do with my clients. And I have seen some really fantastic, amazing results for people who have You know, I've been told more times than I can count, wow, I got more out of that one conversation with you than all of my years of therapy, right? So if you spend a lot of time in therapy, feel like you've done it all, this might give you some sense of some other avenues, some other pieces that you're missing that could actually make a real difference for you. So when you think of trauma, what stands out for you? What kinds of things come up? I'd love to hear in the chat what your experience or understanding of trauma is. So yeah, just share with me a little bit about what you think of when you think of trauma, so we know what we're talking about here. So I'll just name a few, right, of the common ones. Like we think of sexual abuse as trauma. We think of violence as trauma, like so being physically beaten. We think of, well, some of us might think of domestic violence as a form of violence, right? Your mom and dad are fighting. Alcoholism can be a form of violence. Invalid meeting ID. I'm not sure because I just did put the right link up for you. So pain, injury, physical, mental. Yeah, okay. So there are definitions, right, of abuse that most of us would think of when we think of abuse. We think of some of those things that we just mentioned. Now there's a whole other level of, or let's say trauma. So there's a difference, right? There can be a distinction between trauma and abuse. We can experience trauma from things that are not abusive, and yet it still affects us and affects our lives and affects our ability to function. What are some of those things that might be trauma, or even things that we wouldn't recognize as trauma that could be traumatic and have a long-term effect on your life? So I'm curious if you want to share those in the chats also. Like, what are some of the things that maybe fall out of like the standard automatic definition of trauma that maybe we experience as trauma? Yes, Mary, I put it on the event. No, I put it on the general Facebook page, Finding Your Unhappy group page. So trauma could be losing a parent. That could be traumatic. That's not necessarily abuse. Terrifying movies or seeing something that really shocked you. Yes, absolutely. It can be neglect kinds of things, like not being nurtured or loved, right? It can be bullying in school and struggling with your peers. It can be a lack of warmth and attention in your family. Psychological and emotional sort of manipulation. Gaslighting is a form of trauma and abuse that we don't often talk about or recognize, that can have long-term effects on your well-being. Being criticized, ostracized by your family. Going through some sort of medical emergency or health event that you didn't get adequate support for. That can be a long-term trauma. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we consider maybe in the realm of normal that can have a traumatic effect on our well-being. And I just realized I'm not recording on Zoom.
Recording in progress.
Go ahead and record the Zoom call as well. And so all of these factors come into contribution when we think of trauma. And if you experienced it as traumatic and you did not get to process it, then it was trauma, right? Trauma is something that occurs inside of you, not necessarily outside of you. Obviously, there are the outside sources that contribute to that trauma, but how you experience it and how you process it is what defines if it's traumatic or not, and what defines if it's long-term traumatic or not, right? It's your internal experience and state of being. I remember my sister, my parents were going to go to a meeting and my sister didn't want them to go, and she woke up later crying and having like really intense reaction, like, I didn't want you to go, and they hadn't even gone, but that was very traumatic for her. She thought that they had left, and so she was having that trauma kind of response. I think, you know, she was able to be comforted in a way that didn't make it a long-term trauma, but that was still trauma. And so I think you get the picture. It's like there's a lot more that we've been traumatized by than we maybe necessarily realize, right? So in what ways would you say that trauma is still having an impact, like a limiting, like it can impact us in ways that shape our perspective, our ability to be empathic, all of these things, but in what ways do you feel like it's a negative impact or a limitation or a challenge to your life? Because that's what really needs to change, right? We can all go through trauma. It can affect us and impact us. It will impact us always, right? It shapes who we are. It creates part of how we show up in the world. But we want to look at what are those places that are still impacting us that feel like a limitation, a challenge, a negative result that you're still wanting to shift or change or work through, and that is affecting your life currently. So I'm curious what some of those things are. If anybody wants to share. So some of them for me, before I really dealt with my trauma, was being on a constant emotional roller coaster, which is also very akin to being empathic. There are a lot of ways that trauma response and empath reality kind of intermingle and overlap, which is why I did the video last time on pulling apart trauma response or empathic awareness, staying in the past, repeating the same gaslighting, getting out of, so depression, right? Depression is definitely one, 20 plus years dealing with really dark depression, periodic really dark depression in my life. Doing something right and getting criticized anyway, right? And all the feelings that brings up. It made it hard for me to function in a lot of different areas. My relationships suffered. See if this fits for you, but you kind of find yourself in repeat patterns and you don't understand why. The same things keep happening to you. No matter what I do, it's never right or good enough. Yep. My life felt like it was a mess constantly. Like it was sort of this crash and burn cycle over and over again. Self-esteem issues, right? Those are some other stuff that shows up. And not feeling like you matter. Being a people pleaser, that's a trauma response right there that affects our lives and our ability to have a satisfying life. So there's a lot of ways that trauma can play out in your life and affect your life, that is a limitation, but that when you learn to integrate it and get past it, then can contribute to who you are, to how you show up in the world, to what you have to offer, right? So let's get into what the 5 keys are to transforming and healing from your trauma. And what would it mean to your life if you were really able to shift the things that aren't working for you, that are keeping you stuck, that create the conflict in you? I'm curious what that would be like. So some of the things that have shifted for me is like really a whole lot more stability in my life, ability to maintain friendships, to have a job, to have really good boundaries, let people into my life that are actually truly good for me. Just seeing if I'm missing any comments here. What else? Just a sense of peace and ease, getting past my depression, not feeling like I was going crazy all the time, really, really honoring myself and trusting myself. So I'm curious what those pieces would be for you. So the 5 essential keys to overcoming and transforming this childhood trauma. So the number one thing I want to talk about is radical truth, honesty, and truth telling about how you really are. How many of you can relate to being tough, making it not matter, not feeling hurt, making it not a big deal, minimizing what happened to you, and just trying to let it go or make it be okay? When we make it be okay, we miss out on what the actual trauma was. And by the way, that's a great coping strategy in the moment that you're in. Sometimes we need that coping strategy to get through whatever we're going through. And yet, if we don't go back and revisit those places that we've glossed over, made okay, toughened up about, we're missing access to our full level of healing. I've had to go back in and really empathize with my childhood self about oh no, that really hurt. Yeah, I brushed it off at the time and made it okay, but that wasn't okay, and it's still not okay, and I'm going to empathize for that part of myself. And part of when you do that, then you stop letting it be okay in the rest of your life. So whatever you made be okay about the traumas that you experienced, you're likely letting be okay in the rest of your life in some way, even if it's not obvious. Yeah, so Michelle talks about not being socially anxious anymore if she could really heal some of this stuff. Yeah, I used to think I had social anxiety. Some of it was empathic, some of it was trauma related, and now I don't experience that hardly at all anymore. So getting really truthful and honest. Ouch, that hurt. No, that's not okay, right? It's different than replaying and reliving the pain and the hurt over and over and over and over and over again. If that's what you do, if you keep going and replaying that drama, then there's something else to look at, and being really honest with yourself about being stuck in that loop is an important piece of your healing. What sorts of things have you already tried to address or to heal your trauma? Just curious to hear what are some of the avenues that you've explored, because a lot of us have tried a lot of things, right? And it's just therapy, definitely a big one. Some of us shy away from therapy. I definitely did for a long time. Then I went to therapy for a while and didn't find it that helpful. For the first time in my life, I have an awesome therapist, and now I understand why people love therapy, but that wasn't me at all. Kathy Ann says, I may actually like me eventually. Yeah, self-hatred is a trauma response. It's a way that you're trying to, there's a few layers there. Therapy, medication, rapid eye therapy, so EMDR kind of stuff. Yep. A lot of the stuff that we do is addressing the symptoms, right? But not necessarily the root cause. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in our call. Kathy Ann, what you said, there's a piece where dislike of yourself is your subconscious trying to accomplish something for you. Just keep that in mind. The hatred of yourself has a purpose or is trying to serve a need somehow for your safety or protection. So just put that somewhere and think about that for a minute, what it's trying to do for you. So that's number one, is really getting honest and telling the truth about what's really going on for you, how you really are. Number two, which I see over and over again. Let me pause and read your comment. Breathing, mindfulness, therapy only worked when I found a good therapist that was geared toward trauma and healing and holistic. Let me see if I can read the rest. More, come on. Holistic approaches, yep. So all of those kinds of things, some of them have been more effective than others. Many of them are addressing the symptoms, right? The result, the behavior, not the actual source of what keeps your trauma going in the first place. And we will talk a little bit more about that, because there's a reason why it still affects you, why it keeps going, why it's hard to let go of, right? In some way, or it seems like, gosh, when am I ever going to get to the other side of this? And for me, there's a big energetic piece that comes into play in that as well. So let's talk about key number 2, which is being able to have an emotionally appropriate response to what happened to you. So if you haven't first acknowledged that what happened to you was traumatic, that it was a problem, that it hurt, then you're not going to have an emotionally appropriate response to what happened to you. So emotionally appropriate responses can look like anger, they can look like sadness, they can look like all sorts of different things. And we're going to talk in a minute about why you haven't been able to, let me pin myself here. Pin. Okay, there we go. Where was I? So having an emotionally appropriate response to what happened to you. So key 2 and 3 go together. And I'm going to talk about them in conjunction with each other, because to understand one, you need to understand the other. So in order to have an emotionally appropriate response to what happened to you, like being appropriately angry, be appropriately sad, so your parent dies and you're told not to grieve, I've worked with more than one person that, their mom died, somebody died when they were little, and now they're in their 50s and they still haven't processed it. The thing that keeps you from having the emotionally appropriate response is whether or not in your life you had a sympathetic and empathic witness to your experience, to your trauma. Someone that could validate your feelings for you and validate what was going on for you. This is often why, like if you grew up in a traumatic household, but you have a sympathetic aunt or a teacher who really gets you or sees you, this can really mitigate the effect that the trauma has on that person, because they were able to process it in a way. They were able to let out those feelings. They were able to feel and then experience the trauma for what it was, so they didn't have to keep holding on to it and keep repeating it. And this isn't just my own theory. This is through my research. If you want to read a book that talks a lot about this, the work of Alice Miller has been really informative, and you've probably heard me mention her before. But she really outlines how this is essential to the healing process, is whether or not you've gotten to have an emotionally appropriate response to what happened to you. And then it registers in your system. So your emotions, so my point of view about emotions and feelings are they are a system of your body, of your being, that gives you feedback about your life and how life is impacting you. If you have been trained not to have emotionally appropriate responses to what happened to you, then you are going to miss when those things happen to you in your life. So my analogy is the wood stove. I grew up with a wood stove. So heat tells you the wood stove is hot. And the closer you get, the hotter it gets, and then it tells you not, like, you're getting the warning signal not to touch it. If you touch the wood stove, you're going to get burned. Now imagine that somebody trained you to not associate those two things. You're going to miss the warning sign that says don't touch the wood stove, and you're going to touch it every single time, and you're going to wonder why you keep getting burned. Now look at your emotions. If when somebody does something that's a little bit shitty or manipulative or unkind or uncaring or hurtful to you, but they train you out of recognizing the natural emotional response, which is like, ouch, that hurt, that didn't feel good, I'm upset about it, then when that thing keeps showing up in your life, you're going to miss the signal that's going to tell you that that's going to hurt. And so then you wonder why you keep getting the same things over and over again. It's like your emotional system is gotten dysregulated. It's off. You can't see the signs and the signals that tell you, hey, there's something to pay attention to you. Or they've gotten all crusted up, or you've become hypersensitive to certain things. And so it's distorted in that same way. So then it's hard to see. So another thing that I say is, if you haven't been willing to process or you haven't had the space to feel what you feel about what happened to you and recognize the abuse that happened when you were a child, then you're gonna not recognize in the same way when those same things in different forms happen to you in adulthood. So if you had a manipulative parent, but you were never allowed to see what was really happening, then you're going to be easily manipulated in adulthood, and you're going to miss seeing it. When you have the emotionally appropriate response, then it opens up. You start to see what's really going on for you in life, and to gain this place of clarity. One of the other reasons why we aren't able to have emotionally appropriate responses is, so if you don't have an empathic witness, then, and your parent is, or a primary person in your life is the one that is creating the hurt for you, you are going to prioritize maintaining relationship and connection with those people because you depend on them for your very survival. And so if they discredit your feelings, then you're going to discredit them too, because to have your feelings is to disconnect from them, and to disconnect from them is to lose your life source, right? And so it's going to feel life-threatening. Does that make sense? Right? So if your parents are like, oh, stop crying, like whatever, you need the attachment, you need the connection with them. So you're going to make yourself wrong, you're going to make it about you, and align with your parents so that you can have relationship with them, so that they will take care of you, so that you will survive. It's much easier to think there's something wrong with you, because then you can fix it and do something about it and you won't die, than to think that there's something wrong with your parents, because if there's something wrong with your parents, then you're screwed, because you need them to survive. So this is part of the mechanism that happens under the surface, is we learn how to defer to those people that we depend on for our survival. We don't get to process our feelings, and then it creates all of this congestion in our lives that make it not possible to process what actually happened and how we truly feel about it, and we get really, really stuck with it. So what happens when you can't have an emotionally appropriate response, or you can't process what is actually happening to you, whether it's in real time or after the fact? It goes subconscious. You learn how to cope, to cut it off of your conscious awareness, and you put it underneath. You put it into your subconscious. So the subconscious is like the background computer system, the not front end stuff that you don't see, but it runs in the background. In the book For Your Own Good, which is the book by one of the books that I was referring to by Alice Miller, she outlines how several different cases of mostly famous people who either were incredibly destructive on the world or incredibly self-destructive, and how whatever violence was perpetrated, whether it was self or other, was a playing out of a subconscious psychodrama of the things that they were never allowed to and able to process in their lives. And so it had to go somewhere, it had to be processed out somewhere. And so that will happen if you don't get a chance to work out and recognize what is really happening for you. The other thing that we do in our subconscious is we try to cope with the subconscious stories and beliefs about ourselves. So not good enough, right? Somebody brought up feeling never good enough. The truth is, you were never not good enough in the first place. There were just people in your life that failed to meet your needs in the way that you needed them to and expected them to in order to survive. But if we go back to depending on your caregivers for your survival, you can't think that there's something wrong with them or you're in trouble. So the only option you have is to think that you're not good enough, right? And to internalize not being good enough, because then you can do something about it. If I'm just a little bit better, if I can just improve then I have some power and I have some control in this situation, and I'm going to be okay. So that's one place that we put in that subconscious program of not good enough as a survival mechanism. All sorts of other subconscious patterns and beliefs go into play of how we've figured we're going to deal with our life and with our situation. And when I work with clients, so often there is some subconscious thing going on, usually between the ages of 2 and 6, that they haven't been able to resolve or process, that they still have hurt and pain around. They've never gotten to be seen around. They've never gotten to have the emotionally appropriate response that they desired around that. So even if you think you've dealt with it, I just see over and over again how it lives in people so strongly. Even today I was talking with someone who was like going back to her, kindergarten little girl self. And when you get to that underneath layer and give that part of yourself some healing, it can really make a huge difference. And we're going to talk about that part in a minute. Another thing that happens in the subconscious is we make decisions and conclusions about life, about people, about how we're going to function in the world, that then subconsciously run our lives. So the analogy that I often give, let's say you grow up in a family where there's a set way of thinking and believing, and if you don't toe the family line, you're going to be in big trouble. You might get your butt smacked, whatever, if you say the wrong thing. So maybe you decide at an early age, okay, it's not safe to say what I think. I'm keeping my mouth shut. Now, at that young age, that was a super awesome, great survival skill, right? I'm going to keep my mouth shut so I don't get in trouble, I don't get hurt. But then when you grow up, you grow out of that environment, you get into the rest of your life, you've totally forgotten that you made that, but it's running in the background. Then you wonder, why is it so hard for me to share my opinion? Like, I just can't speak up for myself. What is this? Well, it's your little girl self being like, nuh-uh, no way, we're not going there. I'm not sharing, I'm not speaking up, I'm going to get in big trouble. When you deal with the subconscious, that can all shift, and it can all shift rather quickly. Mary said, yeah, you're getting that. That's landing for you. Another thing that I want to talk about as a dynamic of the subconscious, and maybe we'll go with the not good enough thing, is that we take a lie, and then there's a central conflict of our lives, of our family dynamic, that we have made as true and decided is true, and had an erroneous belief around it that we're then trying to resolve in one way or another throughout the rest of our lives. So let's take the example of not good enough. So you decided at a young age on a subconscious level that you weren't good enough, or that if you could just do better or be better, then your parent would finally give you the love, attention, appreciation, and acknowledgement that you desire. And so you spend your whole life, well, until you wake up and get what you're doing, but you'll subconsciously spend your life attracting to you situations in which you are trying to prove that you're good enough so that someone else can love you, pay attention to you, and be there for you. But it's a lie, right? So you took on this lie that if I could just be different, then my parents would love me more, whatever that is. Now I'm going to go out and try to prove it. But the truth is, you can never disprove it because it was a lie in the first place. So if you're trying to prove you're good enough, but you were already good enough, then nothing you do is ever going to get you to that end result of being good enough. Because the real issue was your parents chose not to pay attention to you, or they were really busy with something else in their lives, or they were preoccupied, or they had their own trauma and drama. And it had nothing to do with whether or not you were good enough. But we've taken on the lie that it was something wrong with us, and that if we could just resolve that thing that was wrong with us, then we could finally give ourselves the love, get the love and attention that we truly desire. When you can recognize that, when you can work out the subconscious stuff that is behind that, then instead of perpetually being in those situations where you're trying to prove it, you're trying to get through it, you can stop and say, oh, like, so for me it was unavailability. And both my dad and mom were unavailable in one way or the other. I kept getting in relationships with unavailable men, right? And then kept doing the patterns, the old subconscious patterns that I have learned throughout my life to try to get my parents' attention, whatever that was. And at some point I was like, oh, when I really get this, it's not me, it's them. And it has nothing to do with what I do or don't do. They're just unavailable. Okay, maybe I will say thank you very much and move on and go pick somebody who can be more available to me. And I stopped trying to prove that thing and trying to get out of this pattern. So I'm wondering, is there anywhere in your life that you can see that there's some dynamic or pattern like that, some story that you've told yourself about yourself that you're now trying to prove or disprove, trying to overcome, that's actually really a big fat lie in the first place? And if you could just recognize it as that, you could choose and create something different. And I'm gonna pause and integrate your comments, and feel free to ask any questions that you have at this time. Let's see over here. Yes, so somebody is asking, is the subconscious the same as your inner child? Yes and no. The subconscious is one piece of your inner child, but there are many, many other parts of your subconscious and many other layers and ways that your subconscious works and functions. But the inner child is definitely one piece of the subconscious. Thank you for that clarifying question. Really appreciate it. And Kathy Ann says, of the 4 children in the house, I was the perfect one, straight A's, and did what I was told, just complied with everything, right? And that's a trauma response. That's a survival response. If I just be the good girl, do everything I'm told, like, then I can keep the peace, I can be okay, I can get the love, whatever that is. There's some subconscious thing that you're trying to accomplish, right? And it may or may not, it may have payoffs, but it also has costs to you. And it has cost to being your authentic self and connecting you with your authentic nature. Whoops, my phone charger just fell off the wall, but maybe I don't need it right now. Any questions? So those are the 4 that we've covered so far. Any other questions or thoughts about the 4? So just to recap, the 4 out of 5 keys that we've covered so far to truly healing from childhood trauma. Number 1 has to do with being really honest about the impact that what happened to you had on you, that you're not okay, that you need to do healing work, that what happened to you was not okay. Really being honest, right? Radical truth telling. Number 2 is about being able to have the emotionally appropriate response to whatever happened to you. I mean, I teach my clients how to process their anger and get angry at the things that happen to them, because it gets congested, and if it doesn't come out, it goes in, and if it goes in, it will make you sick. It can even lead to things like cancer. And when you process your anger, you get your voice back, you get your power back. I've seen this over and over again. In my book, Finding Your Own Happy, which if you don't have a copy already, go to findingyourownhappybook.com, I talk about unleashing your inner roar, and that's a chapter on anger and how you get back your power when you're allowed to be justifiably angry. It's just like we talked about with that emotional appropriate response. Like, your anger is there to say no, And so that will help you set your boundaries, know what you will and won't tolerate, etc. And then number three was having an empathic witness, right? Somebody who can support you, care for you, acknowledge what you've been through, empathize with you. And I think this is definitely true in childhood, what kind of helps people cope with traumatic childhoods or not, more so. But I think there comes a place on the healing journey, no matter how much work you've done on yourself and how much success you've had in your own healing, that having other people to be in the healing journey with you is super valuable and will help you go that last stretch, so to speak. And that was true for me. When I found my current therapist, I had done a huge amount of work on myself, but having her and building that relationship with her helped heal some places inside of myself that I don't think I really could have healed on my own. And there's the saying that says, hurt people hurt people. Well, people also help heal people. And having, whether it's an informal thing, like carrying empathic, sensitive, kind people in your life, or it's a professional thing where you have somebody who really understands it and gets it, all of that is going to help you. But I think there is a place where we need other people to really fully transform our experience, and bring us to a new place and help us on that journey. So number 5 goes a bit with the subconscious stuff, and that is the learning to reparent yourself. So this is definitely work with the inner child, helping you connect with the parts of yourself that are still traumatized, still hurting, bringing a bit of that empathic witness to your own self and the compassion for the hurting inner child. So what happens, and also the therapeutic support can help with your reparenting, right? So sometimes you feel like it's beyond me to be able to do this. I never got it in the first place. How am I supposed to do it now? But in each and every one of us, I would say, is a hurting little boy or girl who needs love, care, and attention, and feels insecure. And if we haven't worked with that part of ourselves, if we haven't acknowledged that part of ourselves, often when things get challenging or they mimic things from your history and your past, show up and try to take over and run the show. So your inner little boy or girl gets scared, thinks that you're not doing a good enough job with whatever the issue is, and then tries to take over. And now you're doing all sorts of things and behaving in all sorts of ways, right? So the keep your mouth shut example, that part of your inner little boy or girl is going, no, you will not, don't do that. It's not safe. It's not safe. Now, if you can bear witness to the part of yourself that is really scared and freaked out about that, and bring some parenting to that part of yourself and say, hey, okay, I'm hearing you. You're really scared about this, but I got your back, and I know that we're going to be safe, and will you trust me? Can we work together? Can you know that I'm here for you, and I'm not going to let anything bad happen to you? For example, then the inner child part of yourself that is so worked up and so much taking over the show can calm down, can settle a little bit. And I do this work repeatedly with clients because it's such a big piece of what's going on for people is the inner child that hasn't gotten the adequate resolution, support, care, integration, if you will, to stop trying to be the one that calls the shots and runs the show. And I did this work on my own self when I was processing and dealing with some trauma, and it really shifted things for me in a dynamic way that now I see over and over again with my clients. It's like I was able to separate out the part of me that was the hurt little girl that was reacting, and the conscious, aware, present adult, and then move forward in a different way than just constantly being in the reaction. So if that makes sense. I've been told I'm too much and too passionate about things when I speak on, so I try not to speak so much. I've been, let me just, told I'm too sensitive and emotional, so things have been withheld from me throughout life. Yeah, right? There's like not accept, so that's a trauma right there. Like a trauma that we don't necessarily put in the category of trauma is basically the trauma of saying you are not okay being you. Something about you and who you are at your basic nature needs to change and is wrong. Talk about like, ouch, right? You're fundamentally flawed, basically. You do not belong. You are not okay just the way you are. That can have lifelong trauma effects if we don't learn how to work with them and feeling them. And Mary says, empathic witness are key, I feel. Yes, that is a big part of healing. Absolutely. And you know, you can do a lot for yourself, but then there is a point where having that extra support is going to make such a big difference in your life. And then also like the work of getting to what's going on at the subconscious level, right? You might even not know anymore what hurts inside. You might not know anymore what is really going on, and until somebody is there to be that witness and help almost bring it out of you. It's like part of what an empathic witness does is like you get past the top layer, right? And then you see everything else that's still underneath, because now you're okay to have your feelings, and all of those other feelings that are underneath the primary top feeling can come forth because it's safe and somebody cares, and they can, you know, that you can process through it. And then so here's a trauma incident. So many times I was gulping back sobs because I was told, quit the bawling, you big calf, right? How insensitive is that? I mean, I really think, how many of us have been told that we're too sensitive? Honestly, the truth is, the person who says you're too sensitive is not sensitive enough and is being insensitive to whatever. Exactly, Mary just said it, so insensitive, right? Whoever tells you that you're being too sensitive is being insensitive to what you're actually experiencing and what is going on for you, right? And yeah, such a big difference to, and you have to, like, at some level you get to the place where you forgive them, because how many of the people that did all of those things to you, said all of those things to you, couldn't be there for you, also are just acting out of their own trauma. And don't have better coping skills. So you're bawling as a child, right? So one of the things that happens when kids express and adults can't handle it is that your expression is tapping into and triggering the hurt little girl or boy inside that adult in a way they haven't been able to process. They can't tolerate their own feelings that match the feelings that you're having, so they have to shut you down and shut them off because they haven't processed what's going on with them. They can't be with themselves in those feelings, so they can't be with you, if that makes sense. Yes, trauma is often passed down. So that's a perfect example of how trauma is passed down. A parent hasn't dealt with their trauma, so their kid is having a big emotional expression that triggers into that exact same feeling that they were never allowed to have. So then they cut themselves off from it, and then they like say, quit bawling, you big calf, because they can't deal with what it's bringing up inside of them to face that and to be present with it. And so that's a big piece of it. So those are the 5, what I see over and over again, 5 essential, and there's really, I mean, I'm thinking about like, okay, are there other things that fit into this, all this? Yeah, if you have brain damage or something like that, there might be some other pieces, but these 5 keys will make such a huge difference in your trauma journey, especially if you get to know what's going on at the subconscious level and you get support to work this out and process everything that you've experienced. So what other questions do you have? Anything else showing up for you that you would like me to address before we move into the closing of the call? So the question that's coming up in my mind, if I were on the other end of this call, would be, well, so how do we make this happen? How do we do it? Like, where do we get that kind of support? What does it take? And so I would love to invite anybody who's on this call, and really anybody in my community who's watching this now or later, let's have a conversation. Come on a free clarity call with me. If you're struggling with something related to your trauma or related to your empathic abilities, let's dive deep to find out what the essential pieces are that you're missing on the healing journey, whether it's emotionally appropriate response, or there's some subconscious patterns that you haven't worked out, or you just haven't had the right support to move through it. So let's get to what that big core piece is that will really shift and change things for you if you address it, what the best way to address it will be for you, and then the path to take you there. And we'll just really get to, like, what is it truly going to take to change this, and what's going to take you to get to the other side. You can sign up for your free call at healingmindsandhearts.com/call. That's where we really get in depth about the hows, right? What is the key piece for you, and then how do you incorporate that into your life? So if it's the inner child work, what is that going to look like? If it's, some other stuff, what is that going to look like? And then if by the end of the call I think that we could work together, and some of the work that I do would really help you, then we can talk about that as well. Or sometimes I recommend other resources and other stuff for people if this work isn't exactly what is needed, or if something else is needed. And Michelle said, please repeat address. Yep, healingmindsandhearts.com/call. I will put it in the comments once I'm off of here. And if you're on Zoom, I'm typing it in the Zoom comments. So that just applies to a couple of you, but something that you could check out as well. Anything else? Anything else anybody wants to... Let's see. So we do these calls weekly. Either it's a topic where I dive deeper on a particular topic, or I do energy processing, shifting, intuitive sort of coaching, guiding. So next week we'll be back to intuitive work, and then the following week I'll have another topic coming up. Michelle, thank you so much for coming. Thank you everyone who participated and added your comments and your thoughts. It makes the call so much richer when I get the feedback from you. So I'm really grateful for that. Going forward, if there's something that you're wondering about, whether it's being empathic, something related with being empathic, something related with healing, and Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today. Anything like that, please do share in our group. You can make a post, ask a question. It gives me information about what you guys are wanting to learn and what you're working with, so that I can provide regular content for you. So lots of love to you. Thank you so much for showing up. You can come back and find the replay of this call. You can also go in the media and go to videos. You can find the last class, which was on trauma, childhood trauma and empath awareness, and where they intersect, and that's super valuable too. If you've been dealing with your trauma for a long time, definitely go to that. No, not quite. Mary tried to put the link in, but she didn't quite get it. healingmindsandhearts.com. The minds come for the hearts, just because that's how it's set up. But I'll get that to you in just a minute. Okay, lots of love to everybody, and we'll talk soon. Show up in the group, share yourself, ask your questions, and I'm here to assist you and support you on this empath empowerment journey, because it really can get to a place of ease, confidence, delight, joy, happiness, and not being constantly bogged down by either being empathic or dealing with your trauma. And it can be so much fun. Okay, have a beautiful night. Bye for now. And bye to Facebook.